Well, welcome and hello to everybody who is watching. And I don't know how many people are at the moment for the live broadcast, but for those of you who are watching the video recording later, I want to extend greetings. I'm Phil Bair, and this is the launch of my video podcast channel. And I have invited an extremely articulate guest today, and he goes by the moniker the Faithiest Atheist. But first, a little bit about me. I am a Christian apologist. My focus has been on philosophy, religion. I studied philosophy, theology, and earth sciences at various academic institutions and have been involved in self-study for decades about a lot of these issues and a lot of these topics and subjects. So I guess if you wanted to boil down what my actual credentials are, it would be I read a book once and I listened to a lecture once. So my credentials are not necessarily very impressive, but I think I've learned a few things over the years, and I like to share what I've learned for other people's consideration. Um, there's only one problem with the broadcast today, and that is that my guest hasn't shown up yet. So this may be rather short. Um, And if he doesn't show up fairly soon, what I may do is cover some of the topics that I wanted to discuss today. And most of them are going to come from a book that I published in 2016 called Machines Don't Laugh. And the purpose of the book is to expose the fallacies of atheism. And under the subtitle, it says Exposing the Fallacies of Atheism Again. And the idea behind that is that that these fallacies, these arguments coming from the atheists, are not new. They've been around for a long, long time. Some of them centuries, and theists have actually addressed and refuted these arguments time and time again. However, the atheists still present those arguments as though they have never been refuted. So I was just talking to some friends of mine on another channel a few months ago, and one of them made the comment that, "Oh, well, Phil, what if the atheists say the same thing? Maybe they say that the arguments from the theists have been addressed a long time ago. And so, how is your position any different than theirs?" And my response is, well, if you want to know who has refuted whose arguments, you have to actually study them on a case by case basis. You have to look at them again. We're going to do the hard work again, even though we all wish that we didn't have to. At this point, it's still necessary. And the main focus of the book is to help Christians avoid falling away from the faith due to the seductive fallacies of atheism. One of the things that I mentioned in the book is that I have never ever run across a reason why a believer abandoned belief in God that was not based on some kind of logical fallacy. Um, And if someone wants to point to a reason to abandon the Christian faith or to abandon theism in general, that is valid and is logically coherent, then I would invite whoever has that kind of reason to contact me and present it to me. So, but so far, over the course of many decades, I have heard countless arguments that have drawn people away from their faith and drawn people away from theism. Uh, and they are all based on a fallacy or two, sometimes, or lots of fallacies that are all combined together in one big narrative. So that's kind of the essence of the book, and I cover several different basic fallacies. I address the moral fallacy, where the atheists say that I don't need God to be moral. There is the fallacy that's widely known as the Epicurean fallacy, which is the so-called problem of evil, that if God exists, then he would not allow evil to take place, and he wouldn't allow suffering in particular to take place, especially the suffering of children. And so if God exists and he does allow suffering, then either he is unable to prevent it, which means that he is not omnipotent, or he is not interested in preventing it, in which case he would not be good. He's not omnibenevolent. So I cover that argument, and I deal with the fallacies that are hidden in that argument. It's very subtle. If you ever study the Epicurean dilemma in much detail, you will discover that there are lots of aspects to it. There are lots of little tunnels under the surface that most people are not aware of. And so what I do is I dig up those tunnels and I expose those subtle fallacies that are lurking behind the Epicurean dilemma. And I would love to talk about that today with my guest if he arrives. And I'm hoping that there isn't anything, there isn't any trouble that's preventing him from being here. If there is, then we certainly want to pray for him, and certainly want to wish him well, and hope that he may be able to join us later. And then if he can't join us today, then we will try to reschedule and see if we can have him on at a later date. It is a great honor to be able to kind of have some exchanges with Richard, and I find him extremely articulate. I find him extremely thoughtful. And there are a few atheists that I have come across lately that I've been very impressed with, because they are not the kind of really self-assured and sometimes rude. Not all of them, but sometimes they can be rude, just like sometimes Christians can be rude. But these atheists that I've come across and that I admire are none of those things. They're very thoughtful. They're very respectful. They're very humble. And they're actually an inspiration to me, because I pray that I would have the same humility and the same thoughtfulness that they do. So, and Richard is definitely one of them. So I hope he can join us today. Another one of the topics that I wanted to discuss today has to do with whether or not human epistemology is possible and feasible in the atheist worldview. And I will get into some of the details of that when we have our discussion. But the high-level summary of it is that if God does not exist, and we accept a naturalistic worldview where there's no such thing as a supernatural, that natural law and the natural forces are all that exist, then that means that everything about humanity, including all of our thoughts and beliefs and judgments, are actually determined by the operation of those natural laws. And if that's the case, we have no reason to trust all of our thoughts and beliefs, because natural law that is not derived from intelligence is not going to direct us and guide us toward truth. It's only going to plant ideas in our heads that are the result of all this long train of cause and effect relationships. And so if that's the case, we have no reason to trust our beliefs and our thoughts. We have no reason to trust our evidence. We have no reason to trust our senses, because we could be determined by natural law to believe that we are actually observing something in the natural world and that the external world is really real. And that could be a deception because natural law is determining us to believe that. And if something is determining us to believe things that are other than ourselves, then those beliefs are untrustworthy by definition. Uh, One of my close friends is Dr. Tim Stratton, whom I met just a few years ago, and Tim and I have become great friends, and we've had lots of long discussions about determinism and about the implications of determinism. And he has an argument that he calls the free thinking argument. Um, and the free thinking argument pretty much states that in order for us to reason, we have to have libertarian free will. In order to have libertarian free will, determinism cannot be the guiding reality, the determining reality under which we live. Um, and that's a very crude way of putting it. I hope Tim isn't listening, and I hope he's not cringing um, if he heard me say that, because it's. I would rather have him articulate that argument. But there's actually quite a large family of arguments that refer to this general idea, and it goes back to, in a certain thread, it goes back to C.S. Lewis, because C.S. Lewis said, um, if my mind was not designed for thinking, then why should I believe that it is capable of thinking? And so there's an argument from Alvin Plantinga called the evolutionary argument against naturalism. I think that's the right title. And he makes a very similar argument. So that there's a great pedigree of scholars and thinkers, philosophers and theologians behind this train of thought. And the one that I articulate has more to do with epistemology than it does to rationality, but all of these things are very closely interrelated. Um, so my guest has not appeared yet, and so what I will do is cover a couple of the other ideas that I wanted to discuss with him, and then if he comes on, hopefully we can kind of review them and then talk about them a little bit and see what his perspective on those things might be. I don't want to have a debate necessarily. What I want to do is I want to foster greater understanding, because as far as I know, I believe that he used to be a believer, a Christian, and that that he has rejected the Christian faith and rejected Christian theism, and that's partly the entire thrust of my book, and that is to try to help people who are committed to the Christian faith and who are Christ followers to avoid being ripped away from the Christian faith for reasons that are not good reasons, basically. And one of the reasons that I think Christians need to maintain their faith in God and maintain their belief that there is such a thing as a God who is personal, who loves them, and who is interested in their ultimate destiny, is that if he doesn't exist, then we are pretty much lost in a sea of non-rationality. And by the way, if human knowledge is not feasible under atheism and naturalism, then that means that science is actually impossible as well, because science relies on the ability of human beings to have knowledge and to know things. So if we can't know things, then we cannot actually do science. And that has tremendous repercussions for the scientific community and for the philosophical community as well. My background is it consists partly in the study of the philosophy of science. And so that's something that is of great interest to me. But the thing that I really care about in this whole discussion is my Christian brothers and sisters and the preservation of their faith, so that they can resist the attacks of atheism, because those attacks have no foundation in reality. Um, I have no problem with a valid refutation of Christianity, and therefore people abandoning their faith in God and their faith in Christ. If it is a good reason, then I have no problem with that, even though emotionally I would have quite a painful reaction to it. One of my heroes is Francis Schaeffer, and Francis Schaeffer made the comment in one or more of his books that if you find the bones of Jesus Christ, I will be the first one to step out of line, to step out of the body of Christ. I'll be the first one to denounce my faith, because the Apostle Paul said that if Christ has not been raised, then our faith is futile. Our faith is in vain. We may as well eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. Might as well just live it up. And so, in a sense, in a very real sense, Christianity hinges on the resurrection of Christ, and it hinges on the supernatural. And if that's the case, then if you find the bones of Jesus, then the whole thing is demolished. And I would be willing, if you could find the bones of Christ and you prove conclusively that they are his bones, his remains, and that he did not rise from the dead, then I will be one of the first to abandon my faith in Christ. Because we have to have intellectual integrity. We have to maintain intellectual integrity. We cannot give in to irrationality as Christians, as disciples, as scholars, as even pastors and teachers. So that intellectual honesty and intellectual integrity is extremely crucial for all Christians, and that's partly because that's the way that we actually can have credibility in the world. So I just got a message from my guest, and he is setting up as we speak. So I'm glad about that. I'm happy that he'll be joining us momentarily. So intellectual integrity is what this is all about, and I very much admire my guest and his integrity, and I think that you will see the kind of integrity that I see as we speak with him, because again, he is one of the more thoughtful non-believers that I've ever come across, and that is actually precious to me. You know, that people can be so sincere in their lack of faith or their lack of belief, and I think that there's an element of seeking that I think may still be true with a lot of the people that have abandoned the faith like this. And if that's the case, then I celebrate that, and I want to encourage it, and I want to do everything I can to support them in that journey and in that search. So I think he's going to be here very soon. So I'm waiting for him to pop up on my studio screen here. He said he's actually getting set up. And by the way, he participates in lots of apologetics events. And so I am honored that he's willing to come on and have a discussion today. It's a great privilege, so I have lots of admiration for this guest. I also want to mention, while we're waiting, that there is a chat panel on the side where you can comment and ask questions. And I certainly want to encourage questions from whoever is listening. Please be decent, if you don't mind. And if you want to ask a question, it'll stand out if you type question in the word question in capital letters, and then put your question after that, and so it'll be easy to spot that, and then we will be able to get to that question. And we're going to get to the questions after we actually go through and cover some of the material that I'd like to cover today. But that doesn't mean that you can't ask your questions now. You can ask them at any time in the chat bar. So I'm glad to be doing this. This is my debut of the Cross to Bear podcast. I hope that it's fruitful, and I hope that you will find it helpful and edifying. And I actually look forward to ideas and questions from people, even if they don't hold the same worldview that I do. I'm a Christian. I have been since I was about 13 years old, and I have been studying the Bible all my life. I would be what most people would normally call a Protestant, and so I also wrote a book called From Rome to Galilee that compares the Protestant theology with Roman Catholic theology. And then, as a couple more shameless plugs, I also have written a couple of other books besides Machines Don't Laugh. One of them is called Marx Attacks, and it is about Marxism and the insurgence of Marxism and critical theory in our society, and how it is tearing down and deteriorating the foundations of Western civilization, which are built on valid principles. And then the other book that I would mention is my most recent book, which is called Calvin's Desperation. That book is about the teachings of John Calvin, and it focuses on what I believe to be the core teaching of John Calvin, and that is the ideology of divine determinism. And it's the idea that God determines all things that occur in the universe. The way John Calvin put it was, the will of God is the cause of all things. And as he elaborates on that, we learn that he means all things without exception. So that's another long project that I've been involved in. And I was actually encouraged by Tim Stratton to write the book. He made a comment to me one time after having some of these discussions. He said, "Phil, you got to write this book." And so I was encouraged when he said that. And so I spent 2 years working on that book, and it's the most recent one. It was just published about a year ago. So if you're interested in the books that I've written, you can go to Amazon and just type in the search bar, just type my name, Phil Bair, Phil, last name is Bair, as in the cross to bear. And it will come up with the search results, and all of my books will be in those search results. And if you can't afford, or it's not a good time to spend the money on any one of my books, then just let me know. And I will try to get a copy to you at no charge if you're unable to swing it financially. Things are tight for a lot of people right now, and and they are for me. So that's perfectly understandable. And I would rather someone be able to read my book and not have to pay for it than for them to not be able to read it because of the financial barriers or roadblocks that might exist. So I think Richard is almost here, and hasn't popped up in the studio yet, though. So we're still waiting for that. Um, while we're waiting, I think I may just cover a couple of the other topics that I was going to cover today. And one of them is the idea of believing something by faith without evidence. And I'm very interested in hearing what my guest has to say about that. Um, but in the book Machines Don't Laugh, I make some observations about atheism and some of its key principles, and that those key principles in atheism, sometimes they are core principles of atheism, sometimes they are simply implications of atheism. But those principles are all believed by faith because they don't have scientific evidence to support them, even though that comes as a surprise to a lot of people. One of the things that I mentioned is that intelligence emerged from mindless, uh, impersonal, non-intelligent matter and energy without the help of an intelligent designer, all by itself for no reason. And there is no scientific evidence to support that thesis. I had a conversation with Lawrence Krauss a few months ago. It was December of last year, and I brought up the fact that intelligence coming from non-intelligence through evolutionary means is not something that any scientist can actually demonstrate that it actually occurred. Um, and so he took issue with that. And I think he believes that there is evidence. But I have asked for that evidence and I haven't seen it. And I've actually seen the opposite. I've seen most people, most scientists, most atheists, scientists who don't believe in God, admit the fact that they don't have any evidence that intelligence emerged out of mindless soup. Um, and in fact, uh, there's another principle that comes up in atheism and atheistic science, uh, that says that spontaneous abiogenesis occurred millions of years ago. And spontaneous abiogenesis is the idea that there was no life and then there was life, and that life kind of created itself, so to speak, out of non-life, out of non-living matter, without the help of any kind of creator or intelligent designer. Um, and I point out uh, that there is no scientific evidence that spontaneous abiogenesis like that ever occurred either. Um, and therefore, it has to be believed by faith. In fact, I studied paleontology at the University of Colorado, um, and my paleontology professor got up one morning as we were studying the chapter on abiogenesis in our textbook, and he said, "We scientists believe in spontaneous abiogenesis by a leap of faith." And that was quite an astonishing remark that he made. Um, and I it was all I could do to avoid standing up and saying, "Who's being religious here?" Because if religion is defined by most atheists as believing something without evidence by faith, then the atheist scientists are being religious when they believe in these things without evidence by faith as well. I don't. There's no difference between those two. They're both a faith-based belief, and if that's the case, then I think that we should encourage our atheist brothers and sisters to refrain from criticizing people who are religious for believing things by faith without evidence, because they're doing the same thing in many cases. That doesn't mean that they always do that, because they're atheist scientists who believe in all sorts of things based on evidence, and I applaud them when they do that. And I wouldn't ever want to deny that that happens. But the fact that it also happens to be the case that they believe things without evidence by faith, is something that needs to be considered. And the fact that many of the things that they do believe by evidence, doesn't cancel out the fact and doesn't change the fact that they do believe some things by faith. And if that's the case, then I think we should arrive at a more realistic and a more charitable discussion about whether we're being religious or whether we're being scientific. So I have a guest that has just joined me. And hello, do you have your microphone on?
Well, let's test it now. Does it sound
Yeah.
like it?
Yep, I hear you.
Okay, great.
That's great. Hey, I was just kind of rambling on about some of the things that I wanted to talk about today.
Okay.
And so as we talk about them, we'll kind of be maybe rehashing and reviewing some of the things that I've kind of already given an
Okay.
introduction to. But first, I just want to welcome you, and I just want to tell you that I'm so honored to have you on, and it's a privilege that you're willing to come on and speak today. And I wanted to have you introduce yourself.
Okay.
And then give us a little bit of your background. And I also want to apologize because I'm sure that you've had to do this over and over and over again already. So now I'm asking you to do the same thing again.
Yeah, and it's fine. Hopefully it'll help me get better at it and
there you go.
Be more quick at it.
So I'm doing you a favor.
Right. And first of all, I want to apologize for being late. I realized it was live stream. So I remember when we had this conversation, I said, I better be on time because it's live stream. And then, of course, I got back late from an event and I lost track of time. So I was very, very late. I apologize for that.
Well, no apology necessary. I have been just tap dancing for the entertainment of the audience. And so it's not a problem at all.
Okay.
Of course, my tap dancing is not very good, but
hey, we can do it the best we can, right?
That's right. That's right.
So yeah, I'm the Faithiest Atheist. Feel free to call me Richard. You know my real name. I think we've talked before, so the real me. I don't hide that. I just use the Faithiest Atheist, but basically to just make a point that I realize that not believing in things doesn't absolve me from, not believing in deities, I should say, doesn't absolve me from accepting things that I can't demonstrate. So I say I'm a Faithiest in that respect, and that you could probably come up with an infinite number of things that I accept on faith. And of course, I also realize there's a long Christian struggle as to whether faith means accepting information without evidence or accepting information because of evidence. I realize that too. I'm using it the way that Frank Turek uses it when he makes his book. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. I'm responding. I do. I have enough faith to be an atheist, and so that's my faith-based approach. I look forward to this conversation, and I hope we have a great conversation.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I've had lots of conversations about faith, and you're right. There can be some confusion on the topic of faith, and that confusion can definitely lead to a lack of productivity in a lot of these discussions. And what this conversation, to a large degree, I wanted it to kind of center around some of the things that I wrote in my book, Machines Don't Laugh.
Okay.
And one of the things that I said in that book was that there's always two definitions of faith involved in the dialogue.
Right.
One of them is a relatively recent definition of faith and a relatively recent phenomenon of faith, and it comes really out of existentialism. Because in modern existentialism, there is a blind leap of faith in order to believe in anything that has meaning, because science and reason tend to lead to despair without a certain worldview that can rescue that from getting into despair. And so people have believed and concluded that the only way that they're going to believe in anything that has any meaning in their lives, they're going to have to take a leap of faith and believe it without really having some kind of rational basis for it. And what I've always said is that I think that that is not the biblical concept of faith. That the biblical concept of faith is putting your trust in something that has been proven to be trustworthy. Just like we have faith in airline pilots because they have a track record of safely taking off and safely landing, that we can live with. It's not a perfect track record, but we can live with it to the point where we have enough faith in the airline pilot that they're going to be able to get us to our destination without crashing. So that is what a lot of Christian apologists call a rational faith. And it's very different from the modern existential kind of faith. So,
Right.
but I admire you greatly for actually pointing out that there are things that you believe kind of on the basis of faith, whether that's a reasonable faith or whether it's maybe a blind faith. And I don't know what the proportion is for you, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about that and what you
Okay.
think of that.
Sure. I don't know the proportion either, but I do know a good way to describe it. I don't know if you've seen it before, but there's a meme that sometimes Christians will pass around that it shows like Bart Simpson blindfolded at the top, and then it shows Bart Simpson with a giant telescope at the bottom, and at the top it says how capable we are of seeing our own sin, and of course Bart's blindfolded and he's trying to make his way in the dark. And then it says how capable we are of seeing other people's sin, and it has him with the telescope, really monitoring. I would use that same meme to say all of our epistemology, how well we see our own epistemology, our own philosophy, and even our own sense of metaphysics, those three things. And we're blindfolded and we're doing the best we can. And then how well we see the flaws in other people's epistemology and philosophy and how they perceive metaphysics. And we've got the big giant telescope. And so we could just write manual after manual about how someone's metaphysics and philosophy and epistemology are all screwed up. And then if you turn that around on us, we're like, I've got all the evidence. I've got all the data. I'll bring out my Bayesian,
Calculator.
Yeah, I'll bring out my worksheet. We'll go over the numbers. I got it all. That's what I think. So if I'm right, then a whole bunch of our how we analyze evidence is stacked by our experiences. I'm not as much as there's a scientist named Donald Hoffman who has a book, a couple of books now, I think, that just says it's all not real. It's all, he's not saying there's nothing there. He's just saying that if our brain is locked in a cave, then it's like a permanent cave. It's like Plato's permanent cave, and that it's going to always be something that's not actual reality. The odds of it being actual reality are so slim that he's just going to say it's impossible. I'm not taking it that far, but I would say that most of the things that we feel certain about and think we know are probably some sort of narrative and projection of our mind. And not only that our brains will build up these neural cortices that kind of make it immediate, so that say a Muslim or a Hindu or a Christian or an atheist can be so dug in that there's no facts you can tell them. There's nothing you can say. They're going to probably stay dug in until they die. Not to say that nobody switches, because people switch, people convert and deconvert and switch all the time.
Right.
It's just really, really difficult. And the further you go down the worldview road, the more you get into the epistemology and the morality of your worldview, I think it becomes like a framework that's very comforting, but can also be sort of a prison. And it applies to me too. So, I don't say that as someone who's free from that. I say this is like a human framework that helps us, but also kind of traps us. So
Yeah.
a whole bunch of it is probably an illusion.
The term prison was just a word that popped into my mind right before you said it. So
Yeah.
I smiled when you said prison, because it's true. And I would actually go so far as to say that that the less evidence someone has for their worldview, the more of a prison that worldview can become.
Okay.
And so, but I was commenting earlier before you came on, that that Christians in particular, but I think this is probably true of all worldviews, all religions, all ideologies, whatever you want to call them. And that is that one of the highest values I think that we should embrace is intellectual integrity.
Right.
And one of my favorite authors is a guy named Francis Schaeffer. I'm sure you've heard of him.
Yes. Yep. Smart guy.
And he wrote that if you find what can be conclusively demonstrated as the bones of Jesus Christ, he said, I'll be the first one to get out of line. I'll be the first one to abandon my faith in Christ, and I will no longer be a disciple of Christ. And that kind of follows what the Apostle Paul said. He said, if Christ hasn't been raised, then all bets are off. Your faith is futile. Everything is worthless. Everything is a waste of time. Might as well just eat and drink. And so I think sometimes, to be real honest with you, it pains me to say this, but I think sometimes Christians do not have that mindset. And there may be Christians who would say, if you find the bones of Jesus, it wouldn't change anything for me. And I find that problematic and disturbing. And I think I find it kind of tragic, because if we don't have intellectual integrity, no matter what our worldview is, if we don't have intellectual integrity, we're not going to be taken seriously, and we're not going to have the kind of credibility that I think we should pursue,
If
But
just to kick the tires, because I know you're going to be kicking the tires on me. Let me get the first jab in. What if there were aliens who saw that our solar system was about to be born 5 billion years ago, and they put little subquantum computers into our solar system as it was being developed? So they have minuscule camera angles, videos of the last 5 billion years everywhere on Earth. And what if they took you back in time and showed you the different times that you thought Jesus would have come back, and they showed you that nobody came back? But not only that, they take you to each of the gospel writers, and you're able to track backwards all of those gospels back to the very first person who wrote it down, and you can see all of the experiences of those authors. And none of those authors either saw that or met anybody who saw that. And let's say you have all the time in the world, the aliens can play around so that you can have 3,000 years to do that. And it doesn't take away any of your time now, and it doesn't affect you psychologically. If you saw all that, would you believe it, or would you think they were demons that tricked you or something else?
Well, I would treat the narrative and the testimony and presentation and evidence of the aliens the same way that I would treat any evidence.
Okay.
The first question I would ask is, how do I know that you have actually implanted all these little cameras, and how do I know that this data is accurate and real, or
Right.
how do I know that this data isn't fabricated? That I would ask that question first. But
Okay.
let's suppose, for the sake of argument, that they actually proved beyond any reasonable doubt that their data and their evidence was legitimate.
Right.
If they actually legitimately proved that the principles that I believe in as a Christian were false, then I would have the same response that I would have if you were to show me the bones of Jesus Christ.
Okay.
Because intellectual integrity is absolutely critical. It's absolutely critical for me. Josh McDowell wrote a book called Evidence That Demands a Verdict.
I have it. I have a signed copy here.
Do you? Yeah.
And in fact, I got to hang out with Sean McDowell this weekend at the Apologetics event.
I like Sean a lot. Yeah, he's a great guy. I wish I could work with him. I wish I could meet him and have some partnership there. He's a great guy.
Yes, he is.
And what Josh said in that book is something that I've never forgotten ever since I first read it. He said, "My mind." Oh, no, I'm messing it up. Let me start over.
Okay.
My heart cannot rejoice in that which my mind rejects.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And I thought that kind of set the tone for the whole book.
Yeah.
Because he was articulating a commitment to intellectual integrity.
He definitely was. I remember watching his lectures back in the '90s, and I know he was out before that, but I remember in the '90s watching him and I agree. He wasn't like the pastors on Sunday morning TV who were like, believe it because the Bible says, and Satan's trying to trick you. I remember in the '90s going, this guy's different than them. So I
Right.
remember that.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. No, I like both of them. So, uh, but there's so many things I want to talk about.
Right.
But I said at the outset that I wanted you to introduce yourself, and I really haven't given you a chance to do that yet. So
Well,
what
I
I want to
just,
do is, if you can just kind of give me a little bit of your background, a
mhm.
little bit of your story, and then I want you to, if you wouldn't mind, talk about a little bit about where you have been in the past, and why you refer to yourself as an unbeliever or an atheist, and
Mhm.
and where you actually stand intellectually, because the term atheist uh, has
Yes.
had a lot of different connotations to it, coming from a
Right.
lot of different sources. So
Yes.
I kind of wanted to know what your perspective is on it, and because I don't want to assume things about you that are not true, and that wouldn't be fair to you. So I
I,
want to hear from you. I want to hear from the horse's mouth on this. I'm not calling you horse, but
I appreciate that. And just like I was saying, I use the word faithiest to mean not having the data, but believing in anyway. And I realize that's not the most common. Just so with atheist, I realize that atheist used to mean I'm declaring, no deities. I'm hereby on the side of no deities. Understanding that used to be what it means. Now that the dictionary will say, okay, if you just don't believe in deities, then we'll put that in the dictionary. And keep in mind, the dictionary now, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, Merriam-Webster, I think it was, literally changed or added a definition to literally that to mean not literally. So once that happened, I'm like, okay, so the dictionary is really just kind of recording how we change it. It's not really, I don't know
right,
how official it is, the objective standard. It's really just a memorialization of what we're saying.
right,
So I know atheist came to mean to some people, and I know people fight. They'll say atheist is like asexual, not sexual. You take the A and it's not whatever's after it. I realize that there's those people too. I agree that atheist used to be no gods, and now there's another definition which means I just don't believe it. That's where I stand. I think there's probably not any deities. If there is, I'll be surprised. I actually would get on board. I was in the Marines for 10 years, so I would just get on board with uh, the new situation. Josh Rasmussen once asked me if I told you that some form of deism or theism was true, given the state of the world, what would you think it would be? And I said, well, it's either going to be like a bunch of different deities with different agendas and they appear to different people and push different ideas, or it's a deity that's messing with us. And he'll be like, I'll tell this guy this, and then I'll tell this guy this, then I'll change my mind, and then I'll switch it up. And I'm just having fun with these guys.
yeah,
One of those two, I would agree. So I'm open to some form of superpower, but I don't see the all powerful, all knowing, loves us all with a single message for us all. That's where the atheists will let me into the clubhouse. They'll say, okay, if you don't believe in that, then come on in, come into our Wednesday night suppers and
yeah. You're
we'll
one of
let you in.
us.
Right. But when I say it could be something, and every so often something amazing will happen, and I'll be like, man, really? Man, you can't just tell me that's all an accident. In those cases, the atheists are like backing away, like, hey, what's happening here?
Yeah.
Plus, I go to church. I go to apologetics conferences, as I just mentioned. I just drove all the way to California to be part of an apologetics event with Sean McDowell and Greg Kokel, John Noyes, Robbie Lashua, Clay Jones. I'm probably going to have a podcast with Clay Jones soon on radicalization. So I hang out with Christians a lot, evangelicals especially. I was one. So, one reason why evangelicals are my target audience is because I used to be an evangelical. And I
Mhm.
try to approach them in the same way that evangelicals approach me, and the way that I was taught as a Southern Baptist, to listen to people and find out what they believe, be nice to them, be respectful. You can still hold to your standards and listen to other people and interact with them politely, and try to have some degree of humility. And I realize there's Southern Baptists that don't give across that vibe, but that's how I was raised in the 1970s and 1980s in rural Georgia. My church was really great. They're still great to me. I could still go to my church and hang out with people who are in my youth group. We're in our 50s now. Some of them have grandkids. I've got two teenage daughters, but some of them started having kids earlier and now have grandkids. So, just a great church. Couldn't have been better. I would say the book that started to get my attention, it wasn't the book's fault. But when I was 17, so this would have been 1987, I started having questions. Some of the Old Testament language bothered me. And I just made a post about this on my page. I'm like, the reason why this language bothers me is not because of like some postmodernist, mainstream godless cultures standards. This was how I was raised. I was raised in the 70s and 80s that God is a certain way. And I read some of these verses in the Bible, and I'm like, this doesn't sound right at all. And when I was talking to my youth pastor, especially, he would just have different answers, and the pastor would have different answers, and different adults would have different answers, and it didn't seem to bother them that they had different answers. And this youth pastor bought me a book by J.P. Moreland called "Scaling the Secular City." It had just come out in 1987, and all he didn't know what apologetics meant, and he still doesn't like to this day. He's in his 70s now. He still doesn't like apologetics. He thinks that apologetics is how you talk yourself out of Christianity. That's what he says. And then he points to me. He's like, look what happened to, I got him this book, and I'll do anything to have not given him this book. But he said, so JP Moreland is all about doubts. He's like, okay. In fact, JP Moreland was basing that on another book called The Secular City from years before. And he's like, yeah, have your doubts. It makes sense. Here's some research. Here's some things that you can research. And so his presentation was very similar to how people might read William Lane Craig today. I would say J.P. Moreland was like the William Lane Craig of the 80s. Mm-hmm. And I liked that book, and it made me feel better. But then when I took it to the church, the youth pastor, when he read it about, go ahead and embrace your doubts and do the research, he was like, whoa, this is how you can get in trouble. And then he kind of regretted giving it to me. And then it sort of turned off questions. Then he was like, I don't know what to do with this now. So he was never mean to me. I swear. Like if I got into a wreck when I was 17 or 18, I would call my youth pastor before I called my dad, because he would come and like help me without, knocking me across the road. So, I mean, I loved my youth pastor like a dad, but he did not know how to answer questions. So that just kind of shut down conversations.
Yeah.
And he told me later, he said, that's how I was raised. I was raised the same way. You asked a few questions, and then you got the answer, and you shut up from there, and you just believed. So that bothered me. And so I would say maybe from 17 to maybe 25, I started to think that maybe Christianity was something that people just kind of decided how it was. And all the questions that people had, they came up with answers that worked for them, maybe from another person, maybe on their own. And then they just took that and ran with it. And they just said, okay, I'm drawing the line here. This is me. And I said, I wonder if that's just what religion is. And so like by my mid-20s, by the time I was in the Marines, I began to think it's probably not that. And I noticed in the Marines that I was, outnumbered. And most Marines believe in some kind of God. Usually it's usually not the kind of God that you would hear about in church, but lots of theists in the Marines. So I did counterterrorism. I worked in counterterrorism for almost 30 years. And I would say of the last 15 years, especially, I've really gotten into the neurology of the process people go through in their minds, where they start to get radicalized and they start to hate entire cultures, and they want to commit violence against other cultures. And that really got my attention, because I'm like, how could this happen to people? And we even, sometimes after the fact, sometimes after an attack, we would follow somebody backwards in their life. And we would get to a point where they were perfectly normal. They were happy. They had family. Yep. They were doing just fine. And I'm like, what happened that got them over here? And sometimes, like Sam Harris will say, well, they read a verse and it made them think they had to change, to hating. They read something in the Quran or something that made them think, oh, I've got to start killing people. It's not like that. What happens is you find something that's really important to you, and you're like, oh my gosh, I've got to defend this. I've got to uphold this. This really matters. And that first step is actually very enlightening. I actually recommend it. When people say, how do you become radicalized? It's like there's two steps. And the first step is actually a great step, which is finding something that's important to you, and you want to uphold it and defend it. And you sort of come up with your moral standards and your epistemic and intellectual standards. And it kind of helps define who you are. And I'm like, that's actually a great thing. What happens is you start to hate people who don't agree with you. on that thing. So, and this can happen to atheists, as you know. The history of regimes who are trying to destroy religion. Same thing happened. They're like, this. I want the standard to be us. I want people to, when people are worshiping, I want it to be our regime, not these churches. And they saw the churches as a competitor. So they're like, I got to wipe out religion.
Mhm.
I mean, there's several times in history where that's happened. So it's not about religion. It's, for me, it's human nature that we have this ability to see something that we'll call sacred, and even atheists will say, I won't say sacred, but it's so important that I'm willing to live my life for it, dedicate myself to it. I'm willing to give up part of my own well-being in the interest of defending this and keeping this idea alive. And I think that everyone else ought to, and I'm like, oh, what? Ought to do that too. And so that's what I call this, this moral and epistemic framework. Uh, if you get to the point where you hate people who don't agree with your framework and you really start to dehumanize them, that's where you start to go down this road where you can be dangerous. And then the final caveat I want to say on that is that there's a lot of people in that mindset where they hate people who don't agree with their framework and they don't think of them as humans, but they won't commit violence. We could probably point to tens of thousands of people who talk about violence and talk about killing, and were actually given a gun and given the opportunity, and they called the cops or set the gun down and backed away from the computer and said, okay, I don't know what's going on. So there's something fantasy. There's some sort of a fantasy going on, I think, with a lot of the people who are really angry, that if you actually told them to kill people, they won't do it. But as you know, everybody who watches the news, in some cases, you do it, and that we don't have to go back too far in history. We don't have to go back too many months now to think of people who went house to house and killed entire families just because of the label that they believed in. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm just saying that of all the people who are angry, like for people who are listening right now, if you can think of Christians and atheists who do that all the time, who they're just like, these guys are awful. These guys are the reason that, all our problems are here. We need to get rid of them. All those people that you're thinking of, I promise you, more than 90% of them won't hurt anybody. But they are in a mindset that I think is dangerous and harmful. And so that's why I get on here. That's why I do this, is not to spread atheism. I actually think most people are going to be theists in the future. I know most people are theists now, but I think even more people are going to be theists in the future. I just think that the God is going to be more individualized and less of something that you can grasp and just, I believe in a higher power. I think that's where we're headed. And I'm not against that. So I'm not against more people believing in some type of superpower. I'm just more about us not trying to kill each other over it.
Yeah.
And still maintaining our standards and trying to have some sort of a pluralistic, effective society. That's my utopia. That's my sky daddy, so to speak.
Yeah. 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 Well, boy, you said a mouthful. And it's it reminds me of when Jesus said that if you have anger and hatred or whatever you want to, however you want to describe it, towards someone, that you've kind of murdered them in your heart. And so even if they don't pick up a gun and murder somebody, if you dehumanize and hate people who don't believe what you believe, and that really kind of has a big impact on me because um, I wonder what that kind of behavior and what that kind of rhetoric does to the outside world for people who are considering whether or not they want to believe
Right.
in whatever ideology that you promote and that you endorse. Um, there are a lot of things that make me cringe, and most of them are things that Christians do, and it makes me sad to say that. But I don't remember who it was, and maybe it was Bertrand Russell who said something about no, I don't think it was him, but somebody said, I like this Jesus guy, I just don't like his followers, or something to that effect.
Oh yeah, I can understand that. I understand that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
So
I just want to pretend to be the Christian and defend you guys a little bit. I did some of that this weekend, where one of the apologists pretended to be an atheist, and I questioned him from the audience as a Christian.
Yeah.
So just to push back on that, uh, the I think it's Tom Holland, not the Marvel guy, but the atheist historian who says that we swim in Christian waters. So like the Western cultures, a lot of our moral norms come from not just Christian standards, but that before Christian standards it was different, and that Christians came in and said, no, we're going to use these standards. And I realize there's other things like the Reformation Wars and atheists who want to say other things. I'm not fighting that. I'm just saying that a lot of the things that we see as normal were Christian norms, and we do swim in Christian waters. Most people are either Christians or identify as Christians. Another apologist, Glenn Scrivener, says it's the air we breathe. So because of that, you're going to have, obviously, most people are Christians, so most of your bad examples are going to be Christians, but then most of your good examples are going to be Christians too, because most people are Christians. So of course you're going to have most of the bad and most of the good. I think that's just how it is when you're the dominant culture.
Yeah. Well, I was on the Faith Unaltered podcast a few months
Yeah,
ago.
I saw some of that. I've been on their show a few times as well.
Yeah, right. And I was talking about the book Machines Don't Laugh, and we were talking about whether or not, or why many Christians fall away from the faith, and why they get ripped away from from their belief in God, their belief in Christ, and so on. And I brought up the fact that one of the reasons is because there is such an enormous lack of an apologetics component in the modern church today.
Yes.
And when you talked about your youth pastor who recommended that Scaling Your Secular City book, but then didn't like what it had to say, and didn't like the questions, and didn't like the fact that you were asking questions. But all those all those cringeworthy things kind of came rushing back, because the church just does not seem to be interested in apologetics. And if you want to have an apologetics ministry, then you're going to have to do it independent of the church. And I think that's a great tragedy, because it actually sends a message to the world. And the message is, we don't care about intellectual integrity. All we care about is the theology that we're pushing. All we care about is our church, our little church life, and we just care about you being a good little Christian and not asking questions.
Right.
And so that just makes everything worse. For many years of my life, I was a worship leader in evangelical churches.
Okay.
And I've been pursuing the apologetics project in my life, ever since I was a teenager. And what I discovered is that most churches not only are not interested in having an apologetics program or department in their church, like missions, that kind of thing, but most churches do not like having a theologically astute worship leader.
Right.
They want you to just do the songs they want you to do, and they want you to say all the nice things, and and there's nothing wrong with that, but there is something wrong with saying, do what you're told, and don't bring in any of your theology, don't bring in apologetics into the mix, because we just don't see that as being very productive, and we don't see that as serving the mission of the church, and I think that's a tragic mistake. Because the church, the mission of the church should be to model the same kind of evangelism that occurred in the book of Acts. And what was that model like? They were constantly arguing for what they were trying to defend. They were arguing for the historicity of the resurrection. And there's a passage in Acts, I think it's Acts 17, where one of the apostles, I don't know if it was Apollos or Paul or somebody, who said he baffled the Jews living in this whatever town it was that they were referring to, because he explained and proved that Jesus was the Christ. And so the book of Acts knows nothing of believing in faith without evidence. The book of Acts is all about evidence, and therefore the book of Acts is all about apologetics. And if that's the case, the church should embrace apologetics instead of reject it. And it's so baffling to me, and even if you don't necessarily believe some of the conclusions, in the Christian faith that are articulated in the Book of Acts, I think you can still sympathize with my frustration that if the church is going to present the gospel the way the original apostles did, it has to have an apologetics component. It has to be willing to answer the tough questions, and it has to be able to answer the tough questions. And most churches are not able to do that. One of my close friends is Dr. Craig Blomberg, who was distinguished professor of emeritus now of New Testament at Denver Seminary. He and I have been friends for years and years. We used to have lunch almost on a monthly basis to talk about theological issues and apologetics and so on. And he wrote a letter recommending that I be admitted to the University of Colorado. And in that letter, he said, Phil is more well-read than the majority of any of any graduate of Denver Seminary that I've ever met. And I didn't see that as a compliment. I saw that as something to be lamented.
I can see that,
because I think his attitude and my attitude about a lot of these institutions, a lot of these seminaries is kind of the same. They teach students theology, but they don't teach them how to think, and they don't teach them how to defend the faith. And if that's the case, we're going to come up with a bankrupt witness, to our society. So I
actually
wasn't surprised when you talked about your youth leader and how he wasn't happy with the whole scaling the secular city. I wasn't surprised by that, but I am saddened by it, definitely.
Right, and also I wanted to say that because I study a lot about neurology and anthropology and stuff like that, I want to say that if Christianity wasn't the dominant religion, if some other religion was dominant right now, and I realize that wouldn't have anything to do with which religion is true, but let's just say religion Z is the most popular religion right now. Most of the advocates would be the same way, because part of the trick to our social glue is to have something sacred and don't check it, don't look into it, accept it and toe the line. So you see a lot of people doing that now, whether it's politics, for or against a particular politician or an idea. It's here's our basic points, defend them, uphold them, repeat them, and don't look at them. And in some cases, don't even make jokes. And I think that's very human nature. And if you're part of a religion that says, wait a minute, hold on, we should be testing these, and we should be placing them up against reality and seeing if they work, then I think that's good. That's a good aspect of your religion, that you're willing to look into that. Because intuitively, the way the social glue works is to not look at it. It's to toe the line and keep your head down and follow the authority, which is why I think so many groups fall into an authoritarian mindset eventually. Even if you have something about not doing that, a lot of people fall into it anyway, because I think that's just a biological temptation. Not that we're doomed to our biological temptations, but there's something that we have to work with.
Yeah. Well, I want to get into a couple of the ideas that I brought up in the book.
Okay.
Have you read the book, by the way? I didn't know if you had or not.
I haven't. When you invited me to this, I looked you up and saw some of your lectures and talks, but I haven't gotten the book yet.
Okay. Well, that's okay. I forgive you. Just kidding.
Right. And then plus, I think you invited me like a week ago, and I've either had podcasts or apologetics or something each one of those days since.
Yeah.
But yeah. I have tried to research you a little bit.
Well, I did want to cover some of the ideas and some of the arguments, I guess you could say, in the book. And the book does two things. It exposes what I think are arguably the fallacies of atheism.
Okay.
And I know that you're not a full-on atheist necessarily, based on some of these definitions and so on. But but it's also a presentation of positive evidence, positive arguments that I think establish the truthfulness of the existence of God. Um, and but I always, I don't want to just be confined to an echo chamber and only discuss these things with believers and people who are just naturally going to just agree with me.
Right.
I like to I like to bring these things up and run them past someone who doesn't agree with me and who won't just automatically accept the arguments and so on. So I wanted to talk to you about some of these and just see what your perspective is on them,
Okay.
because
It's probably better this way. So I'm not prepared. I haven't prepared like I didn't read it and say, oh, I'm going to defeat this. So I'll be, you'll be hitting me out of left field with this.
Yeah, and by the way, the purpose of this is not to set a trap
Right.
for you or
Right.
anything like that, and it's not to debate. The purpose is to be able to get real, honest, and rigorous feedback on these things, because
Yes.
that helps me. Because if I've made a mistake, I want to know it, and
Yes.
I can't think of anyone better to let me know that I've made a mistake than people who think my arguments are full, are full of holes. So
Right.
um,
Well, and I know that about you. I've talked to enough people after you invited me who said that, you're not out to like, gotcha or anything like that, that this is going to
yeah,
be a great conversation. You've got a
um,
good reputation.
good. Well, that's good to hear. I hope I'll try to live up to it.
Okay. Me
um,
too.
But before I do that, real quickly, I really want to ask you a question to satisfy a real strong curiosity that I have, and that is that when you go to apologetics conferences
Hmm.
that are hosted by the likes of Sean McDowell and others, what do you say at those apologetics conferences? I mean, what are your if you do workshops or seminars or talks or
Hmm.
anything like that, what are those talks all about?
Okay.
If you're not a believer and don't agree with evangelical theology and philosophy.
Okay. Well, yeah. Well, first of all, I would say that once I first thought that that religions were made up in my 20s, I went through like an angry atheist phase, which is, why do you believe that? You're brainwashed. So I went through that phase. But then as I was studying my radicalization at work, and I went from the Marines to the federal government to work in counterterrorism, and I really started analyzing how people talk. I realized it's not religion; it's something about human nature. So then I said, okay, that's wrong. The idea that if you stop being religious, you'll stop being like this. I learned pretty quickly that's wrong. That's not true. So then I said, well, then what is it? And I began to say, okay, there's something about human nature that makes us this way. And so most of these books behind me are about how, in my view, I think there's nobody in charge, and so that just leaves life. And you can say, how did life get here? That's another thing, but that just leaves life to try whatever. And I think that a lot of our moral systems and our intellectual standards come from trial and error, and so that made me more humble, and that gave me sort of a mission. And I use that Southern Baptist language of mission and preaching and ministry. So a lot of times I'll just talk about how human nature can do that. A lot of times these Christians will ask me, why are my enemies Christians? I learn about how to deal with atheists, and then I'm knocked across the room by another Christian, and then I'm knocked across the room by another Christian. So why are my enemies Christians, and why can't I find an atheist? And I'm like, well, mostly because atheists don't want to talk to you and they think you guys are crazy. And then the reason the Christians don't like you is that they think God is watching them. And they're like, if I don't knock him across the room, I'm going to be in bad standing with God. So I can give people some insight as to why our human nature can be so belligerent, and it doesn't feel like we're being jerks. It feels like we're being righteous. And atheists, again, have the same issue where I've had so many atheists come up to me and say, the fact that you're going to church where, the Reformation Wars, churches lead to Reformation Wars, so you support the Reformation Wars. So let me tell you all the atrocities that happened in the Reformation War. And I'm like, okay, there's no way around that. Some people are going to have that approach. So I'll talk about how human nature can do that. There's 3 Christian organizations now that will have me go and give. I'm like a final exam. So the organizations will spend a week. So it's like an immersive experience where they teach them how to deal with different objections. and have them practice. And then I'm like the final exam. I'll either drive in or they'll fly me in, and I'll spend sometimes 2 or 3, sometimes 4 hours giving my presentation. And then the crowd will just come at me and they'll say, what about this? And what about this? And what's your standard? And how do you know? And are you sure that you're sure that you're sure? And we'll, go at it for 4 hours. Those are always pleasant. I've never had, I have had some, it's funny. Sometimes the group that will hire me have kids, that are in the audience. They're teaching the kids, and then there's chaperones in the back, and the chaperones will get mad. The kids have been prepared for me saying things, and so I say it, and they don't get mad. But then the adults, at the end, the adults like, I need to talk to you, and you need to read this book. But for the most part, they've been very pleasant experiences. So that's usually what I do. And then sometimes it's just to hang out. So like I would say 5 years ago, in fact, it was 2019 was when I decided I'm going to do this. And I just went to the church and listened to Frank Turk and just hung out. And the only time I raised my hand was when someone was like, is there a Muslim who's ever converted to Christianity? And I was like, Nabil Qureshi. And then I'd shut up again. So sometimes I just hang out and listen. But my whole thing is just like there's an apologist named Bill Scott. He'll go to mosques. He'll go to Buddhist events, Hindu events, and just hang out and listen and just try to understand how they see things. I'm doing that too. Yeah. So it's not always featuring me. Sometimes I'm just a participant.
So real quick, would you say that you would have an interest in encouraging Christians to avoid believing in their Christian religion for the wrong reasons? Because
right, yeah.
If you talk about human nature and how human nature can sometimes spawn belief in certain religions, and that doesn't make the religions true, right. that you're really kind of, I don't know if I want to use this strong language, but I'm not sure if I can, if I have a good alternative, but it almost seems like human nature can make people deceive themselves into believing certain religion is true.
Yes.
And it is part of your agenda and part of what you care about to say to people, hey, if you want to believe in Christianity, great, but don't believe in it for the wrong reasons. Don't believe in it because of this human nature mechanism that's operating here and is kind of leading you into something that lacks intellectual integrity, like we were talking about before. Is that kind of part of your heart in this?
Yeah, in fact, that's very much. Oh my goodness, hold on? Are you still there?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, my home alarm activated because I've got
you just stuck your finger in my eye, but I'm here.
Yeah, I've got I don't know what the balloons are for. So I've got 2 teenage daughters, and I've got a dog and a wife and neighbors, and so at any point you might hear some screaming and yelling. My home alarm just activated, so I tried to swipe it off, and it made this go away.
Okay.
So yeah, to get to your question, very much when I get up to speak, it's usually not to convince people to be an atheist. It's usually to say, hey, look, there's different kinds of people, and you'll probably find that Christians who behave in this particular way are probably more effective. And here's what you'll hear: some Christians say that you're weak. They'll say you're not following the Bible. They'll call you a liberal. For me, the funny thing that I've seen in the last 10 years is extremely conservative Christians calling each other liberals because they won't repeat something that they just heard on Ben Shapiro or something. Yeah. And I'm like, just so you didn't hear that one talking point from Ben Shapiro, so now he's deconstructing, and he's extremely extreme conservative Christian. And I'll say, so you're going to get that. So here's how to the way to deal with that is to understand why they're accusing you. And so in fact, when I get the feedback reports, usually when the feedback reports come out, sometimes they'll say that my messages hit home more than what their teachers taught them, because I'm not telling them from a position of a Bible. I'm just saying human nature is like this, and so if human nature is like this, then Christians are going to be like this. And so at that point, it's just a matter of catching yourself and deciding whether you want to do that. And then practicing, because one of my biggest messages is that your brain goes by patterns. It's not always moral. It's not always like, haha, I enjoy this, so I'm going to just keep doing it. Haha. It's not always like that. Sometimes it's just like, this got us through yesterday, and it got us through the last 10 years. We're going to keep doing it. And it could be, just a nutrition pattern, or it could be a scrolling pattern, or a pattern that's just not healthy, but it got you 10 years down the road, and your brain is like literally created neural connections that says we're just going to keep doing that every day. And you can tell yourself what you want to tell yourself, but we're going to keep doing that.
Yeah.
And so I try to tell people it's not always good versus evil in your head. Sometimes it's just a pattern. Sometimes it's an intuitive thought, and you just got to kind of capture that. I think Tim Stratton, who talks about taking your thoughts captive. I agree with that. That sometimes you just try to catch yourself and say, okay, this might not be an evil thought. This might be intuitive. This might just be a pattern, but it's something that I recognize as harmful. I'm going to try to get around it. I'm going to build a new pattern, and hopefully make myself a better person. And I've been doing that. I try to stay in shape. I try to be a good family member. I try to be a good leader at work. I try to be a helpful member of my community. And that came from trial and error. I wasn't born wise. I wasn't born, with this great understanding. I was terrible. I was a terrible person. And then I was like, why am I miserable? Oh, because you're terrible. And it's not to say that I'm not terrible now, but I just changed my ways.
I think you're terrible.
Right. Right. And, so yeah, I don't pitch myself as like the guy who's a great person now, just that somebody was so terrible at certain times that he's like, man, I can't do that. And so I just stopped doing it. And sometimes that takes doing something different every day for years before that becomes a new pattern.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I talk about things like that. In such cases, sometimes I'm telling Christians to be better Christians rather than atheists.
Well, I think that's great. I mean, I've never encountered somebody who has that kind of approach before.
I hear this. Do you know Eric Hernandez?
Yeah.
He said to Jude, "You're the only person doing this. This is your market right now."
Yeah.
And that might explain why I'm doing like a podcast or an event or a day. I actually don't want that. I don't want that to be the case. I want more people to start doing this, and then I'll get drowned out, and then I'll go back to my normal life. I really don't want to be famous, but I do want to get the message out. I definitely want to get the message out.
Well, what you're doing, ironically enough, is you're actually reinforcing some of the central principles of Christian discipleship for people.
No!
I know your head might explode here, but in the Christian faith, and I'm sure you know this, one of the mandates of discipleship in Christ is to overcome our human nature, to overcome our sinful nature, and to not live according to our sinful nature and our human nature. And so you're helping Christians avoid, kind of in a backdoor fashion, really. I mean, this is the way that I see it. I could be wrong here, but
I've heard this plenty of times. And that might be too much of a burden for me to carry or deserve, but I definitely foresee, and I've definitely watched, like I think, in fact, I know for a fact, I've only had one person come to me and say, I'm an atheist because I listened to you and I questioned myself and I decided to become I've only had one person do that. And that was just recently. But in all those years, I've seen a lot of Christians and a lot of atheists be less vitriolic and more focused on being a better parent and a better community person and better at nutrition and more able to take criticism and just brush their shoulders off and keep marching forward. I've watched a lot of people do that. I'm not taking credit for it, but I've just, that was my goal. My goal was to take people who are kind of angry and harming themselves and making them better. And I saw a lot of them get better, whether I was the guy or whether I just helped. That's been my mission more than anything.
Well, I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that that I have met some people who call themselves atheists, even if there isn't a uniform definition of that term, among all of them, who are extremely thoughtful and extremely humble. And I place you in that category.
Thank you.
If you truly are an atheist, you are one of the atheists that I admire. Another one is David Johnson. He is so thoughtful, so humble.
I need to meet him. I don't know him.
Yeah, he was on the Real Seekers podcast.
Okay.
I don't know how many weeks ago it was, but then I asked Dale Glover, who is the host of the Real Seekers podcast, if I could come on and follow up on the original conversation. And David came on with me.
Oh, that's great.
On that one.
Mhm.
and he is another one of those people who I think he loosely calls himself an atheist, but he is so humble and so open-minded, and so respectful and so gracious. He has more grace, and I think of you this way as well
Thank you.
than a lot of Christians that I've met, and that's kind of sad to say, but the graceful atheist is, to me, um, it, that is something that we can celebrate because, um, in the first chapter or in the introduction of the book, I talk about how it used to be that atheists were content to just coexist with people of faith,
Right.
and they would articulate their atheism, and they would say, we don't believe in God, we don't think that there's any intellectual or uh, logical justification for believing in God, but they weren't, they didn't care if other people believed in God.
Right. They weren't antagonistic. Right.
Yeah, but what they would do is they would go around trying to get nativity scenes torn down and that kind of thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they were mostly, well, not mostly, but a lot of them were about the separation of church and state. Get religion out of the public square, because it doesn't belong there because of our American principles and that kind of thing.
Right.
But that's not true anymore. It's not. They're not content to coexist anymore.
Yep.
Now, what I call the new atheists
Me too. I use that phrase as well.
are
And a good real quick summary, because people say, what is new atheism? New atheism is the determination to get rid of religion. And so
right.
if you don't believe and you don't want to get rid of religion, then you're not that. But if
Yeah,
you're like, no, we need to stop religion, then that's new atheism.
and they don't want anybody to believe. It's not that they don't believe. They don't
Right.
want you to believe either. They don't
Yeah.
want anybody to be Christians.
Yeah. They're like, get rid of it so we can start solving our problems rationally. That's the new atheism mantra.
And they're
Mantra.
very aggressive,
Mhm.
and extremely. I would call them hostile.
Yep.
Now, I don't want to be uncharitable,
Some are
but
hostile.
I think it is accurate to say that some of them can be very hostile and that they
Yep.
have a hostile agenda.
Yep.
And you're right. They're trying to rid the world of irrational people, because irrational people tend to do harm to society, and they tend to wreak all sorts of havoc. And so we need to get rid of this irrationality.
Yep.
Um,
It,
and
that's the human nature thing that I'm talking about. That's where they found something sacred, which is no religion, and then everyone else ought to do that, and then I'm going to dedicate my life to it. And I hate people who aren't as dedicated to that as I am, which is
right.
almost exactly what ISIS would say. And I'm not comparing atheist to ISIS, but the mindset and the delivery are almost identical, which is, this is sacred. Everything, I will do everything. I will give my life for this, and everyone else who's not doing it is evil and needs to go.
Right.
That's the same language.
And simultaneously, they strenuously deny that they are religious,
Yep.
when
Okay.
they actually are exhibiting some of the hallmarks of religion,
Yes.
and that is dogma. It's believing things without evidence on the basis of faith. And when you confront them with the fact that they are believing something by faith without evidence,
Yep.
they can get extremely hostile at that point. They
Yes.
the and it's almost to the point where it is politically incorrect to tell an atheist that he believes something by faith.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
And I'll say I have not yet had atheists, because that's another reason why I did this. The Faithiest atheist thing was to say our side is doing it too. It's, for me, it's not religion, it's human nature, and atheists are doing the same thing that some religious people are doing. I have not yet had an atheist organization say, "Hey, come hang out with us and tell us more." Whereas churches are like knocking down my door saying, "Come and talk to us." So
yeah.
it's funny the atheists aren't ready to. At least the organized atheists have not yet reached out to me.
Well, that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, me
That
either. Me either.
doesn't surprise me. And that's not a slam on atheists, and it's not a slam on their character. But it is, it does say something about their agenda. It
Right.
absolutely does. Well, if you wouldn't mind, I just want to go through a couple of the points that I make in the book,
Okay.
and I want to get your perspective on it.
Okay.
And don't be afraid to tell me I'm an idiot or that I'm crazy. I've just gone off the deep end, and I need to go to the funny farm. You can be as challenging as possible, or as you want to be. Not challenging as possible, but you can be as challenging as you want to be. In how you treat these, or what you think about them.
Okay, and if some of these topics looks like it's going to be a longer conversation, we can always have a follow up to this.
Sure, yeah.
And I'll just commit to reading the book first, and then we can. So for some of these topics, we can just have a longer conversation.
We're at the hour-and-a-half mark, so we're not going to go tremendous amount more.
Okay.
But I do want to cover some of these, and we can do it on a high level basis.
Okay.
And if you say, hey, I would rather think about this, and I'd rather read the book, and I'd rather kind of do a little bit more homework about that before we discuss it, that's fine too. I'm not gonna accuse you of running away or anything like that, like the Monty Python run away. So and we've already alluded to this to a certain degree, and this really is related to what we've already said to just a certain extent. But the point is this: atheism is a faith-based ideology.
Mm-hmm.
Some of its key principles are: A, intelligence emerged from mindless, impersonal, non-intelligent matter and energy without the help of an intelligent designer, all by itself for no reason.
Except for the no reason. And I guess it would depend on how you see reasons.
Yeah.
For me, existing or not is a reason, even if it wasn't an intention. So if you have like a puddle of things and time passes and events happen, and some of those things in the puddle are still there, the reason is that they just happen to have the things that helped them be there. They weren't intending to do it. So except for that.
When I say for no reason, I don't mean without a cause.
Right. Okay. So yeah, then in that case, I would agree with what you just said.
When I say for no reason, what I'm talking about is that non-intelligent, impersonal matter and energy, if there's no mind there, if there's no intelligence there, then there can nothing that it causes can be caused for a reason. It can't be caused for a purpose. In other words, it's kind of a teleological concept.
Yeah, the teleology, if there is teleology, it's not the kind that we're familiar with that would come from a mind.
Yeah, and it wasn't intentional. Yeah.
Right.
And then B, spontaneous abiogenesis occurred millions of years ago and was what jump-started the entire process of biological evolution.
Right. And the only thing I don't know there is the timing. I don't know if it was like a spontaneous lightning moment or millions of years of small proto moments. But but without, so you go to, let's say you go back in our history to where there's life forms, and then you go back 15 million years and there's no life forms. I would say there was no agent 15 million years ago who said there's going to be life forms here in 15 million years. Watch and see. Yeah. I'm saying there was nothing there like that. So it happened without that. That's definitely my religion.
The idea is that it happened, not how long it took or whether it was abrupt or gradual or anything like that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
The basic idea is that it happened.
Yeah. And then that's one of my faith points.
Is it? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And C, someday science will discover the natural laws that were responsible for A and B.
Yes, I agree that's going to happen. I actually not only believe that, it might even happen. Enough of it might happen in our lifetimes that I think we're going to see a different brand of apologetics. And I say that religion won't budge when that happens. When it does happen, and I'm saying it is going to happen, when they do discover how life formed and how life evolved without an agent, religion is not going to budge. It's not going to budge at all, and I'll explain that too. That's
okay.
I have a strong feeling.
And so my observation about this is that that all three of these key principles, and there are more. That's not an exhaustive list of the key principles of atheism or the key implications of atheism, but it is. It's a sampling of some of the key principles.
They're good ones. They're prominent ones.
And I think they're some of the most important ones, because when I studied paleontology at the University of Colorado, they spent a lot of time talking about these things, almost as much time as they did talking about fossils and carbon dating and or radiometric age dating, whatever kind it is, and so on.
Okay.
So, and I think that we can safely say that it is a fact that all three of these have no scientific evidence to support them, at least at the moment.
I agree.
Because there's no scientific evidence that someday science is going to discover some natural law that it hasn't discovered yet. That's simply a belief. It's simply a matter of faith. It's simply a hope. I hope it'll happen.
Right.
But nobody can point to some scientific evidence and say this scientific evidence leads to this conclusion. And nobody has.
I agree with that, and I also think that when it does happen, and again, faith-based claim, it won't be because there's a new law. It'll be that there's conditions that we didn't realize were available.
So some aspects of an existing law or something we didn't know about. Okay.
Stuff doing things that we didn't think would happen, and it would be because other things happened before. That's good. That's my faith.
So the point and the conclusion that I draw from this is that all three of the above don't have scientific evidence. Therefore, atheists believe them by faith without evidence. And since believing things by faith without evidence is the essential hallmark of religion, according to most atheists, then isn't atheism a religion based on that view? If that's how you define religion. And so, again, I get lots of pushback from atheists on this topic and on this point, because they don't like hearing that they believe something by faith.
Yes.
And one of the atheists that I have in mind is a wonderful gentleman by the name of John Loftus.
I know John Loftus. I haven't had a conversation, but I followed him.
Okay. I've had 2 conversations with him on the Atheist and Christian Book Club, which I think you should join, by the way.
I'm going to be the guest star on
that's right.
11th. Yeah.
That's right. You are. I forgot all about that. Yeah.
In fact, people can go to the Atheist and Book Club now, and they can see my interview with them because I don't have a book. So what happened was James Walker contacted me and said, "You're going to be our next guest." And I said, "I'd love to. I haven't thought about a book yet." And he's like, "I'm in charge of Atheist and Christian Book Club. You're going to be our next guest. And what we're going to do is we're just going to have a conversation. And then the Atheist and Book Club is going to judge that. And you're going to defend your thesis based on that conversation." So that's
and I also saw your interview with Daniel Ray about a week ago, I think.
That was it. That was the book, so to speak.
Yeah. But we're going to talk about it on March 8th. That'll be the discussion that you'll
March 8th. Yeah. That's
yep. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. I'll definitely be on that in that discussion.
So going back to John Loftus, what was the thing?
Well, John Loftus he says a great deal about evidence and about faith. He's one of the most high profile critics that I've seen of people who believe things without evidence on the basis of faith. And I've been on some of the podcasts from the Atheists. And I was a guest on some of the podcasts where, the hosts were atheists, and, it was a whole atheist milieu, and John Loftus came up, and some of his writings came up in some of those interviews. And he seems to be one of the major proponents, or at least one proponent of the idea that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Yes.
And that it is intellectually dishonest to believe in something without evidence. And so when I point to these observations, it's kind of bewildering to me that theists can often be criticized for believing something by faith without evidence, when that is something that occurs within some of the core principles of atheism, not just the peripheries, not just some satellite ideas out here, that are far removed from the central core of all this. And so I think I kind of understand your perspective on this. I think you kind of agree with my with my observations here.
I absolutely do. I wish we could fight. I was looking forward to a fight, because I was just thinking, like, how do I defend laughter as a natural explanation? And I'm like, I have no idea how to defend laughter. So, but it turns out that didn't even come up, or at least not yet. So
come on.
absolutely agree with those three things. And again, it's the one of the main reasons why I do Faithiest Atheist is that it's not, for me, it's not religion, it's human nature. And religion is one example of how we can make things that are important. We can defend it and uphold it so much that it kind of takes over our mind.
Right.
And then we just lash out at people who don't like it. And then we start to dehumanize. That's human nature. And atheists do it just as much. And those three things that you said, it's true that naturalism doesn't currently describe how that happened. It doesn't even describe existence. Something my 14-year-old daughter 10 years ago when she was 4, her older sister was like talking about some of the dumb things that we have a lot of Mormons in our area, and some of the things that the Mormons were trying to teach her because they were trying to bring her in, and she was telling it to my younger sister, her younger sister, my 4-year-old, and she was like, there can't be a God because of all this crazy stuff. And my 4-year-old, with no training at all, just said, but look at all this stuff. At a 4-year-old, look at all this stuff. And I'm driving the car and I'm like, that is a really good combination of like cosmological and fine tuning and maybe contingency. I was like, she just kind of summarized all that as a 4-year-old in just a few words. That's a really good argument.
Yeah.
She's still she's still sort of a theist in the fact that there's just all this stuff. So that's another mystery that naturalism can't explain.
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to say that those do require belief in something that we can't show. At some point, I'd like to talk about how I think what's going to happen if they do that, how it won't change things. It'll just change how we talk about it.
Okay.
But first of all, I just want to agree that you're right. Naturalism can't show that. We accept it, and we get mad, or we can get mad when people challenge that. In very much the same way that religious people can get mad when we challenge the Bible or conclusions about deities.
Right. Well, if it's a fight you want,
yeah.
Let me throw this next one out.
Okay.
And see what you think of it.
Okay.
And again, I'm not here to fight. I'm here to just to have a great dialogue and to gain greater understanding. But the next one is this: atheism destroys human epistemology. And I'll elaborate on that. If there's no super intelligent being that designed us, all the thoughts and beliefs in our heads are determined by blind, random, non-intelligent forces of nature.
Tim Stratton just entered the room.
Yep. And this is a variation on what Tim Stratton, but this is kind of a chain in a long history and a long pedigree of arguments that revolve around the same central theme.
Okay.
That is that since the forces of nature are not intelligent, and the atheists like Richard Dawkins insist on that, that what we begin with is non-intelligence. So
right, that's true. That's true.
Since these forces are not intelligent, they have no comprehension of truth, and therefore they have no reason and are incapable of determining us to have true beliefs. They are only capable of determining us to have beliefs. That's all. If all that's true, we have no way of knowing whether our thoughts and beliefs are true or false, and human knowledge is utterly destroyed. So if there's no God, we could never know it, according to C.S. Lewis. That's the way he put it.
I'm very familiar with C.S. Lewis. Yeah, because
we could never know anything.
Right.
And the way that C.S. Lewis crafted this argument was that if the random winds acting on the sand created a map of London, would that map be reliable? And the obvious answer is no. So if random forces that are simply acting according to a long line of cause and effect are simply that they're just creating all the thoughts in our heads through the laws of physics and chemistry, we have no reason to believe, we have no reason to trust any of those thoughts, and there's no way that we can know whether our beliefs are true or false. We're simply being determined to believe that they're true or false. So what is your kind of what would your response be to the idea that atheism destroys human epistemology?
Wait, and real quick before I answer, I just want to let my 14-year-old walked in with her friends, and they don't know that I'm on a podcast. So just I don't even have to mute myself. I'm just going to yell at them. Hey, Cece, I'm doing a podcast, so no screaming. Okay. Okay.
Come hi for me.
and the podcast host Phil says hi, and you can imagine the 14-year-old's response to that. Okay.
I have 2 daughters, and they were 14 once, and
right. And the usual, man, they live up to the stereotype. So we could talk about this for 2 hours, because this has been like the heart of my, not just the research, but what I work with. The very first answer, the biggest approach I want to work with isn't the truth value yet. It's how we perceive meaning. This is the one that I really want to preach. This is the thing. I'm on the pulpit. I really want to preach to people. I have 2 books behind me. One is The Return of the God Hypothesis by Stephen Meyer, and the other one is the Until the End of Time by Brian Greene. So those are 2 books. Stephen Meyer, obviously Christian; Brian Greene, obviously atheist. And they both have science books. The Return of the God Hypothesis and Until the End of Time really are very similar books. They talk about the cosmology of all the things that it took for us to get here, all the things that it took for life to happen, and all the different achievements that have happened over time. And they both talk about that exhaustively. Both of them are just huge books that get into that. But they also have the author's personal take on meaning. And Stephen Meyer says that a very formative part of his life was realizing that meaning doesn't count if it's just something that comes from us. If mindless particles came to our perception of meaning, then that's not really meaning. That's just an illusion. And Stephen Meyer was like, before he even believed in God, he was like, I'm sorry, but I just can't accept that. Like, there has to be meaning that exists higher than us, and we can discover that meaning. It can't be something that just mindless particles, accidentally came up with. So that for him, no matter what you tell him, no matter what science fact you tell him, he's like, you're going to have to explain to me how meaning came to exist without that higher form making it so, and making it so that we can rationally reach our way to that conclusion. So that's Stephen Meyer's approach. Brian Greene says the fact that meaning, and again, of course, Brian Greene is assuming that it's true, but Brian Greene says the fact that meaning came accidentally and that it was, whoops, oh, okay, meaning, that makes it even more precious. And the fact that one day all this is going to be dust, and I'm not going to exist, and my loved ones aren't going to exist, the limitedness of it is what makes it meaningful. And then he goes further to say, if you were to tell me that some higher force created meaning and I'm just supposed to discover it, he said, for me, this is Brian Greene, the atheist, saying that would be sort of nihilistic, because then it's forced on me. It's some other agent's decision, and I just have to agree with that. I don't get to have my own creative process and my own journey. So he's like, I don't like that. So Brian Greene immediately dismisses meaning coming from up here. Stephen, I'm mixing up my names, but I think I said Brian Greene dismisses it happening from above. Stephen Meyer dismisses that it happens from within, but they both take meaning as the ultimate foundation of their journey. They're both convinced that meaning happens separately, but it drives them. So like Brian Greene and Stephen Meyer are both big family men. They're big, they invest in the community. They invest in learning. So if, again, I haven't gotten into the truth value, but, or whether one of those is true or not, but obviously one of them has to be true, or at least one of them has to be false. The fact that atheism leads to, destroying epistemology, I don't agree. It could end up being an illusion. So let's say that atheism is true, and Stephen Meyer has just imagined this thing. I would say do whatever you got to do to get to meaning. And if Stephen Meyer gets there that way, great. And if Brian Greene gets there that way, great. But you need to have meaning, which ties into my first thing about finding something that's important to you and that you're willing to dedicate yourself to that thing. That's my biggest message. You might meet somebody who says, I agree with you on meaning. John Loftus agrees with you on meaning, but he just thinks that it has to come a different way. And if you think, okay, well, you're going to collapse into nihilism or you're going to destroy epistemology, it's not happening. There's atheists who will live their whole lives still studying, doing their best to make their community better. Maybe it's all elusive. Maybe it's all an illusion. Maybe we're fooling ourselves, but it's not happening. So that will be my biggest push, is that some people believe in meaning in a completely opposite way, and it's still a driving force of their life, and they're able to maintain it all the way until they die. and even pass it on to future generations.
Mhm.
It could still be false, and I didn't get into that, but I just want to at least say that this idea of meaning comes from a different way sometimes, and it works. It works too. It's working for me. So that was the biggest thing I wanted to push before we got into some of the other dimensions of that.
Yeah, and but in as far as epistemology is concerned, one of the responses that I've heard from, from this point is that, well, if we didn't have knowledge, then we couldn't put a man on the moon.
Right.
But we did put a man on the moon, so therefore, human knowledge must be possible.
Right. It is. That's my thing. Is that we can definitely we've achieved the ability to determine true things about reality. So let's say you want to doubt the moon exists or the moon landing, you can still say we have air conditioning and satellites. Those are my two things. When someone says, well, if we're all just making it up, then everything's an illusion, nothing's real. And I'll say, no, if you've ever been in a room where that's climate controlled, and if you've ever spoken to somebody on the other end of the world, and that you have the image of them talking and they can respond to you, then you already know we have discovered true things about reality because we have air conditioning and satellites.
And I actually agree that we
Yeah.
have discovered true things about reality.
Yeah.
And when the atheist responded that way, my reply was, but you're actually arguing against atheism by acknowledging that, not for it. Because one of the things that I mentioned in the book, and the next line of reasoning that I bring out in the book is that the proposition knowledge is impossible is self-defeating, because if knowledge is impossible, it would be impossible to know that knowledge was impossible. And if a proposition is self-defeating, it's automatically false, and its contradiction is automatically true. So my argument in the book is, if atheism is true, knowledge is impossible. The idea that knowledge is impossible is self-defeating, therefore it is false. Therefore,
and how do you get to if atheism is true, knowledge is impossible? How do you get there?
Because if atheism is true, then our minds were not designed
right
to apprehend truth. All of the things that we believe are true are simply the caused by the forces of nature that have nothing to do with true or false.
Right.
So the argument goes, if atheism is true and there's no God, human knowledge is impossible. Mm-hmm. The idea that human knowledge is impossible is self-defeating, therefore it is false. So if atheism is true, human knowledge is impossible, human knowledge is not impossible, therefore atheism is false. Therefore there is a God. We have to be created by an intelligent creator in order for us to have knowledge to begin with. That's kind of the drift of the argument.
Okay. I'm familiar with that. I've had similar conversations with Tim Stratton on this too.
Yeah, and Tim and I, like I said, Tim's free thinking argument is one in a family of arguments. That there's a lot of variations to this argument. One of my favorite books is by Victor Reppert. It's called C.S. Lewis's Dangerous Idea.
Okay, I've never heard of it.
It's about how C.S. Lewis argued that under naturalism, human rationality and human knowledge are pretty much
right. I'm familiar with C.S. Lewis saying that, and this is one of my problems with C.S. Lewis, because he's very smart. He's a great writer, but I think that his sense of doom for atheism has made it so that some Christians treat it like poison. And I would just push back and say, if it's not true, then just be kind, because you can see atheists who are living good lives and trying hard. And if it's all an illusion and we refuse to see the facts, this is my shortcut answer. I don't believe this is the case, but if it is the case, then just be kind and just say, okay, these atheists are being idiots and I'm going to call them out, but these atheists aren't. And I'm just going to be supportive and loving and just kind of shake my head in sadness that they refuse to see these facts.
Yeah.
Go that second route.
None of these things should ever be used as a weapon. The attitude that I have about it is that this doesn't lead me to the conclusion that atheists are idiots or that atheists don't know anything.
Right. We skipped a step and we don't want to admit it.
Yeah, I think, yeah. And there have been lots of things that I have believed for over the course of a long period of time.
Hmm.
And someone confronted me about it and challenged me and said, this belief of yours, you need to really examine it because it's got some incoherence in it, and it may even be self-defeating. And if that's the case, then we should talk about it, and let's grapple with it together. And that's really the purpose of bringing up this point, and that
Yes.
is, let's grapple with this together. And is there a way that we can have true knowledge without an intelligent designer behind our existence? And if there is, I would certainly be interested in exploring that idea, but it is a rather perplexing problem.
Yeah.
Um, and but the problem is true. The problem also exists with some Christians,
Yeah.
because there's a tribe of Christianity called Calvinism,
Yeah.
and Calvinism includes the idea that God determines all things. And my argument is that all determinism destroys knowledge, whether it's theistic determinism or materialistic determinism. Determinism is determinism, and it has the same implications for human knowledge, regardless of what flavor of determinism it is.
Right. In many ways, atheists and Calvinists have that have that same problem, because
Right.
if atheists, well, it depends. There's one thing about atheism, which is that um, I forget the philosopher who said that if you knew everything, you could predict what's going to happen in 15 million years. If you know every single thing, you can put all that together. And there are atheists who don't agree with that. They say there's so much randomness that you can. There's even an example of that. I can get it with our time. I've got 5 things that I want to say, and I know we don't have time for all of it, but some atheists will say there's so much randomness that if you go back 15 million years, you still don't know what's going to happen 15 million years later, even if you have everything. You can do a lot, but you can't do everything because of that randomness. But
Well,
you're right about the determination is still.
well, I do want to get to the things that you want to say. That those 5
Okay.
things I find them kind of intriguing. And what we can do is we can skip the next point that I wanted to bring up, and maybe we could address it later if you want to do a part 2.
Yeah,
podcast.
I could see so much, because these things that you've brought up, and I'm glad I didn't read the book, because because you brought up a lot of things, and they all kind of came up at once. I can see now we could probably do a whole show on each one of these talks.
Yeah, we could, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of this is seed planting.
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
Dropping the stones in the shoes.
The next point just has to do with what the nature of mankind would look like if God does not exist.
And I would say it's the same as Christianity. I would say if God doesn't exist, we have things about us that are inspiring and things about us that are devastating. So I think my message and the Christian message. I was talking to John Noyes. He was given his sermon yesterday, and I was like, we have the same message. We have things about us that are inspiring and things about us that are devastating. And I have a naturalist, point of view behind that, and you have a Christian point of view behind that. But we have the exact same message, I think.
Well, tell you what, let's. If you would be so kind, if you'd like, I can send you a complimentary copy of the book.
Oh, wow. Okay. I want to support you too, but yeah, I would like it. Then I can still order it, and then that way I'm familiar with more familiar with your story.
To do that, I would have to order it from Amazon and then send it to you.
Well, then let me just do it. I'll just do that.
Pardon me?
I'll just order it. You don't have to do that.
Okay. Well, if you'd like, but the other option would be that I could send you a PDF copy of it.
I do better holding the book.
Yeah,
I'm old-fashioned.
You and a whole lot of other people, and I really value that. So, but the point that I would really love to explore with you is the chapter in the book called "Machines Don't Laugh," and it's the same chapter as the title of the book.
Okay.
That chapter is really kind of the central thesis of the whole book.
Okay.
And I don't want to. We don't have to talk about it right now, but the main thesis is that if God does not exist, then we are nothing more than biological machines, as Stephen Hawking put it.
Well, and I agree with that. I agree that we are. I think that ties into those 2 different views of meaning. Is that if we're only biological machines, then for me, that's all the more reason for us to try to get this right, because there's not going to be another chance. There's not going to be an eternity where we can,
Yeah.
brush that off. That, once we go,
Well,
we go.
the idea that I add to that is that if
Mhm,
we are mere machines, if we are
mhm,
just biological machines,
mhm.
human beings have attributes that biological machines would never have. That's kind
Okay.
of
Okay.
the drift of it.
Okay.
And so one way to put it is, if there's no God, we are mere machines. Machines don't laugh, but human beings laugh. Therefore, we are
Right.
not mere machines, and therefore there is a God. That's kind of like the general drift of it. So
Right.
the,
And I can't make an argument for laughing. I think I can make an argument for cooperation, and I can make an argument for zealotry. But I don't know of an argument for laughter. I don't know if there is one, but
Yeah. Well,
I,
and
I
it's the laughing is just one aspect of human nature,
yeah.
because there are tons of things that I would argue would not exist if we were mere machines.
Okay.
Mere machines don't love, they don't hate, they don't have friendships, they don't sing songs, they don't compose symphonies. So all of these things are attributes of humanity that are out of place in a naturalistic universe. So
Okay.
but go ahead and, if you don't mind, read the book, get the book, read it. And then I would love to have that conversation, because that's really one of the central ideas, that I like to focus on. And it's also something that I want to bring up with Christians, and I want Christians to understand, that these ideas are out there, and that they need to be considered, and that Christians and atheists alike need to consider them. And if they're valid, then they could be a reason for a Christian not to abandon his faith. And that's part of that is a lot of my heart in this whole thing. But,
Okay.
let's do this. Can you start on your 5 things, and
Yeah.
then see how far we get? And then if we think we're going too long, then maybe we can defer the remainder to the next conversation, because I am enjoying this like you would not believe.
Yeah.
Right
This is a great conversation, because you're talking about things that I've agonized over for 30 years.
there. Yeah.
Um, the biggest point, and this was the very first point that I made when I started talking, was, remember when I said how the blind Bart Simpson, blind to a sin, and then the telescope Bart Simpson is looking at everybody else's sin. And I said that also applies to epistemology, philosophy, and metaphysics. Not metaphysics itself, but our use of metaphysics. Um, I want to bring up two terrorists that I was studying years ago. They're gone now, but these two guys hated each other, and they both accused each other of not understanding scripture or God or philosophy or reason or beauty or math or logic. And the funny thing about them was, we knew them. They had grown up together. They had grown up together in Morocco. They were raised to be imams, so they had recited the Quran as in grade school. They went to Western schools. They spoke English. They were Western educated, extremely intelligent guys. They had the same view of their denomination, but once they decided they were going to go, once they decided that violence was necessary, eventually they split up into two different groups, and different experiences kind of fractured them. And so they had two different groups, and they spent the remainder of their lives hating each other and sending each other long scholarly texts with citations and stuff. It's like a
Wow.
Facebook post from heck with citations, accusing
See,
each other of not understanding things. And they would say, look, I'm just using metaphysics and philosophy and epistemology as, it's not me or you. I'm just following the facts here. That's what I mean by the thing that they found sacred, and their sense of hating people who don't agree with them. It stacked the deck. So when one person said, you've self-defeated yourself, and you've destroyed your ability to keep going, that was an example of how he was blind to his own epistemology and philosophy and sense of metaphysics. There's so many words now. Were kind of stacked up the deck. They kind of stacked the deck against himself outside of his conscious awareness. I can tell you, they both died sincerely believing that they were right and that the other guy didn't get it. So I think this is something that happens to us, and I think that it's not just our sins; it's how we see things. And so, what's self-defeating to one person can cannot seem that way, or it can seem trivial to someone else. And then two people who are decidedly not terrorists and are very loving. I'm here in Arizona with James White, who's a great family man, and just otherwise a very loving person. But he thinks that Modernism, he thinks Tim Stratton is self-defeating, and he thinks all of Tim Stratton's work is just all self-defeating. And Tim Stratton would say the same thing about him. But also Tim Stratton's very loving. Both of those guys would run into each other's houses and save the other one in a fire, at their own risk. So I am not saying they're terrorists. I'm just saying that in their minds, they have both reached this conclusion. Probably two of the most intelligent guys I know have reached this conclusion that the other one is self-defeating, but you cannot accuse them of not understanding the Bible or logic or having read the other person's position or philosophy or metaphysics. You can't accuse either of them of being unfamiliar with that, although they'll each say that the other one misses something. So there's something about human nature that does that. And so I want to push that first, is that whenever you hear John Loftus say that there's no way that Christianity can be true, or you hear Christians say there's no way that atheism can be true, keep that in mind, that there's something about how we do that to ourselves outside of our conscious awareness that should at least make us second guess, whether that can be, whether there's a possibility that something might exist that we haven't thought of.
Yeah. Well, as a side note, in my book, Calvin's Desperation,
I did see the cover for that.
Did you? Okay. Yeah. And not very many people noticed the little bead of sweat coming down his temple.
I think you pointed that out in the video that I watched.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm so mean. But in that book, I reference James White quite a bit throughout the various chapters. But I have an entire appendix that is devoted to James White's treatment of Tim Stratton's omni argument against irresistible grace.
Right.
And so I point out a lot of the fallacies that James White is committing in his treatment of that omni argument. And then I follow that with another appendix entitled "The Tribute to James White." And not
that's nice.
Know this, but James White has had an enormous influence on my Christian walk, in my discipleship, in my understanding of textual criticism, and all sorts of theological points. And he has been a magnificent warrior, and still is, for the Christian faith, when he goes out and debates Muslims and debates King James only people, and he'll debate Roman Catholics and that kind of thing.
Yes,
he has had such an enormous influence on me, and I celebrate and I am affectionate of his ministry. I love that. When you said both of them would rush into the other one's house to save their kids from a fire, that's not only true of James White, but he has such an enormous influence in the body of Christ, and I think that influence is overwhelmingly positive and healthy. And so, man, I love the guy. He has helped me in a whole range of theological issues, helped me understand them better, helped correct some of the things that I had gotten wrong. So
that's inspiring. I like to hear that.
Yeah, it's definitely. But so I understand that point one. I think it's interesting. And I have a lot to say about it, but what I want to do is just give you the floor.
Okay.
And if there's any more you want to say about that, I want to hear it. And then, but if not, I'll let you go ahead and go on to number two. If that's what you want to say about one.
Well, just to add the final point, so what you just said is sort of my wrapping up of point one, is that you can decide to say, okay, I'm right about this, but I'm also going to decide that the other person doesn't have to go. And so the reason those two terrorists really got me thinking I've got to change, I want to be part of the change in the world, was that I was like, I can't believe that these two guys who knew each other and were friends are now dedicated to destroying each other. You can add to it. And like what you just said, I didn't even know that you did that tribute to James White. In fact, at first, when you started talking about James White, I'm like, he's going to just bash James White, but you didn't. You said I had these issues, and then I also gave him a tribute, and that's actually a great way to deal with this problem that I'm talking about. Is to say, okay, there's also probably some great things about this person. I'm going to make sure I recognize that as well. So
And
thank you for that.
also, when Tim Stratton had his debate with James White in Houston,
I saw that.
one of the things that I think Tim said, but this is nevertheless true.
Yeah.
Tim teaches a course on the Trinity at Trinity Theological Seminary, and the textbook he uses is James White's book called The Forgotten Trinity.
He did say that. Yep.
Yeah,
and it's true. It's true.
So this is, I really like this trajectory of not allowing our disagreements to turn us into monsters and to start treating as though when you were having your interview with Daniel Ray, one of the things that that popped out was this aversion to dehumanizing people that don't believe what you believe.
Yes, that's my jam.
Yeah, and so that's powerful, and I'm glad you shared that.
And right, and are we supposed to be this way because God mandates it, or are we supposed to be this way just from trial and error? At some point, did people say we can't do that? We got to find another way, or did God say no? I've told you this, and you need to discover it. Whichever of those is the case. My thing is, you take two people who are determined to not dehumanize other people, and there's points where you have to stop. I always reference my favorite episode of Little House on the Prairie, where three bullies are in town, and as nice as Walnut Grove is, the bullies just keep exploiting it until finally the town's like, no, man, to heck with these guys. And the town, so that each of those three guys can outmuscle everybody. They even beat up Charles Ingalls. But at some time, the whole town is like, but you can't take all of us. And the town gets together and says, okay, you got to go. So it's not loving all the time, so you have to draw the line sometimes. But if you can fight the urge to dehumanize and find other ways, whether God tells you that or whether trial and error tells you that, my thing is, I don't care. As long as you're doing it, I'm with you.
Yeah, well, I would say that if Christianity is true, God definitely does tell us that, because we have a mandate in Scripture that says, "Be ready to give a defense of the hope that's in you, but do it with gentleness and respect." And I think that's a good deterrent to dehumanizing people. And we are called to love, and so that has to be a part of the entire picture. And if it's not, then we're really going to go off the rails. So
okay, that's that was my first thing.
Okay.
The second thing is 2 books just came out written by atheist scientists who specialize like in neurology and psychology. So these guys are not Christians.
Urology?
Yeah, neurology.
Oh, they said urology.
Oh no, neurology, neurosciences.
The end makes all the difference.
Right? Yeah. Cognition, psychology. These guys are like really well-known and respected scientists in those fields. And one of them wrote a book called Determined. It's Robert Sapolsky. And he's saying there's no free will. And the other one wrote a book called Free Agents. And both of these books are behind me somewhere. And they're both atheists. So imagine that Christianity just doesn't exist. And we're all just, like we're in John Loftus's ideal utopia where we're all just scientists following the data. Here's a leading scientist saying we don't have free will. And he talks about all the different factors that go into our decisions, not just recently. So if you make a decision now, that's not just a result of things that are happening to you now, but things that happened 6 months ago, things that happened 6 years ago, things that happened to your grandparents, things that happened while you were in the womb, things that are happening in your culture. And he lists all those things between Determined and another book he wrote earlier called Behave. He literally gets into so many different factors. He's like, I don't see any room for free will. And that's Robert Sapolsky, Determined. The other guy's name is Kevin Mitchell, and his book is Free Agents. And he says we do have free will, and he approaches it completely differently. He starts with your first living organism, or even like your bacteria. And he's like, there's a chemical that will say, go towards the light, and a chemical that says, run away from light. Another chemical that says, go towards this chemical reaction or go away from this chemical. And so there's like just different chemicals sort of determining which way you go as a bacteria. But over time, life evolves so that you have so many different um, uh, inputs around you, pressuring you, that you got to have a mechanism that says, okay, I see this chemical saying to go towards the light, and this chemical that says go towards the resource, but I also see this chemical that says predators over here, and you've got to optimize. You've got to decide which of these chemicals. So there's got to be a choosing factor that says, okay, we're not going to go towards the food because of this predator, even though it is food. We're going to let the predator. Uh, what's the word when you outvote something? We're going to let the situation with the predator be the deciding factor to not go after this food. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't name what that mechanism is, but he's saying that biologically, that's how some species survive better than others, is that they took all of these factors that Robert Sapolsky had just listed and said, okay, there is all these factors, but I've got to make a choice. And we can all feel the tension when we're, when we have different ideas. It's not always whether I should rob a bank or whether I should go help somebody across the street. There's usually a whole bunch of other things, and it's not always good versus evil. There's just a bunch of factors to consider. So the fact that we feel this tension makes me think that we're at least perceiving free will. So I don't think that determinism is true. I don't know what the mechanism is for free will. I don't know what it is if God exists. I still don't know what the mechanism would be for the free will. But my main point is that without Christianity, here's two scientists in 2023, just a couple of months ago, who came up with completely contradictory answers. So that's if you're wondering whether scientists, atheists, atheism science has resolved free will, it hasn't, because I want to say the two top voices, but two of the leading voices still disagree with each other, and they thought to have a debate, and they had a debate, and the best they could come up with was Robert Sapolsky said, "I'm not dismissing the idea that there could be some sort of free will. I just don't know how it would work."
Yeah.
So I wanted to put that up as my second.
And that same debate exists among Christians, because there are Christians that believe in libertarian free will and Christians that believe in determinism, on the Calvinism side, and so. Right. The debate rages on. I'm not sure it's going to get settled. I think that it has been settled by some arguments, but that doesn't mean that everybody is convinced, and so it's not settled in that sense. Yeah. I would like to, if you can send me those books, like in the chat or on Facebook in the Messenger or something like that. I'd love to explore those, so. Sure,
I will, and I'll just repeat the titles: Determined and Free Agents. You'll see Robert Sapolsky, Kevin Mitchell, but I'll send it too.
Okay, cool.
The third thing, still going with free will, and I tied into it just a second ago. This is when I go talk to people, and usually Tim Stratton has been at a few of these events where he's one of the apologists that kind of trains the audience, and then I come in and test them. And I tell them, when it comes to free will, I'll say, here's the thing. We feel the tension. Everybody feels the tension of making, I've got to make the right choice. And if I don't, it's going to be bad. And if I do better, then I should know why I'm making these decisions and accept the consequences of my decisions. And I should agonize and struggle with this tension that I feel. And I said, even if free will is not true, even if there is no free will and it's all determined, I said, if you choose to just give up and say, okay, determinism is true, whether it's Calvinism, whether you're approaching this as a Calvinist, because we've had Calvinist students in these events too. In fact, some of the instructors are Calvinists. Whether it's Calvinism or the idea that atheism determines, which again, atheists don't agree on this, but if you decide that everything's determined and you just give up and you say, okay, I'm just going to wait till I'm determined to do something, nothing's going to happen. If you're in that case, you're actually making another decision, which is to just kind of sit there. And your life's going to be much different. If you don't get out there every day and pursue your goals for nutrition, exercise, watching your family, making sure you're in good standing. I always say, what is my wife thinking right now? And what is my boss thinking right now? And, make sure that I'm in good standing with them. If I don't do that, then my life's going to be much different. And then, exercise, nutrition, my community, somebody needs something from me. Do I go take care of it? All of those happen to me throughout the day. And I wake up and spend 16 hours, maybe more, dealing with that. If I just stop and say, never mind determinism, my life's going to be much different, and it's going to be much differently. So don't give up. If it's an illusion, keep the illusion, maintain the illusion, because that's the third thing I want to say is if determinism is true, don't act like it. Act like
Well,
there's
actually, that actually leads some people to conclude that determinism is unlivable.
right, right.
And
I
so,
think I think it is. If you
which is kind of another good argument against determinism, to be real
yeah
honest with you, you know.
yeah,
The
and I'm all for it.
determinism,
I'm just saying don't live that way. Live like what you do matters. In fact, Tim Keller. What I love Tim Keller. I know a lot of people disagree with me, but Tim Keller used to say, he said, "What you do matters." However, he's like, I don't know how to logically make sense of God's sovereignty and man's free will. I don't know how to make sense of that, but I can tell you that what you do matters.
yeah, yeah,
And I know, theologically, I know that he felt like he sort of had to come down on God's sovereignty, but again, modernism deals with that too, but he just didn't agree with that. That's a whole other thing. Okay, then the fourth thing is that, in my view, uh, we didn't evolve to reach the truth. We evolved to survive, but that doesn't mean we can't reach the truth. And that's when I bring up the air conditioning and satellites. Also, though, that was relatively recent. It was relatively recent, in our history that we got to air conditioning and satellites. But we have throughout our lives gotten to like roads and agriculture and things like that. So we are able to reach true things about society. But it's just that we didn't evolve towards doing that. We evolved towards cohesion. And so I like to use this idea, this concept, and it's just a metaphor that I make up. But I say, like, if there's a bunch of villages around a volcano, and all these villages are separate from each other, but they're near a volcano, and there's one tribe that honestly believes that they've got to throw some of their kids into the volcano and some of their crops into the volcano to keep the volcano from going off, and they literally believe that. They might actually outperform the other tribes all around them, because the other tribes are like, that volcano hasn't gone off in any of our history, and say it's dormant, but the tribe believes it. But because the tribe believes it, they work their butts off with their agriculture. They compete with each other to have who's the best kid, who's the best raised kid to throw into the volcano. So they end up spending a lot of time raising their kids well and working on the agriculture and taking care of each other's houses. So they're doing true things about their cult community. They're actually reaching true things, and they're dedicating themselves to true things, but they're dedicated to something that's dumb, which is throwing things into a rock. But they're doing it anyway because they believe it. So I would say natural selection, because natural selection is heartless and it's not an agent and it doesn't actually select. It's a metaphor that Charles Darwin made up. Uh, if natural selection was watching that, and you're like, this is horrible, this village is doing that, natural selection, if it was an agent, would say, like, I don't care. That's just how it is. They've become better at agriculture and building things, and let's just say medical things, and living healthy and how to hunt better. They get better at it, but they're dedicated to something that's not true. And natural selection will be like, whatever. They're out competing. These other villages aren't doing as well. I don't know what to tell you. And let's say that we all evolved from that village. Then we would have that capability, that some of those chemical compulsions to think like that. And there's nothing in history or anthropology that said we evolved from that kind of community. I'm just saying that I'm using this metaphor to say you can be dedicated to something that's not true, but it can lead to actions that would catch natural selection's attention. And he would say, okay, yeah, you're doing things that actually help you guys, even though you believe in something that's not true. So I wanted to, it's not threatening to religion because I've made it up, but it's just a concept that how I can make sense of how people can not believe something that's true, but they're doing things that actually matter to their survival. So that's my fourth thing.
great.
And actually, I think the fifth thing was something that we had covered before. So the more I think about that one, that's probably less important right now. So we'll probably stick with those four things.
Okay, all right. Well, one of my friends, newly acquired friends, is a guy named Dale Glover,
Okay.
and he manages and runs the Real Seekers podcast and channel.
Okay.
And one of my most frequent observations about Dale is that every time I'm on a show with him, I learn something new.
Okay.
and he thinks of things that I hadn't thought of before.
Hmm.
And so I'm going to take that same accolade and I'm going to bestow it upon you, because the things that you have talked about today are things that I have never thought of before. And I have learned a great deal from our conversation today.
Thank you.
I'm going to count you among the people that I learn from, and the people that challenge me, and the people that I take great benefit from,
Hmm.
just because of the fact that you've thought of things that I haven't, and I've learned something from what we've talked about, and so I can take what I've learned, and I can chew on it and plant it and see what grows out of it. And as if we talk in the future, and I hope that we can talk a lot in the future,
Hmm.
if that's the case, then you'll be able to see some of the things that have sprouted from the seeds that you planted in my mind today.
Hmm.
And I would enjoy that very much. I
Yes.
think, and I hope I can plant some seeds in your mind as well.
Yes.
And I'd like to see what might grow from that, in addition to it.
Are you going to be at the book club? Are you going to do that on the
Yeah,
8th?
I'll
Okay.
I'll be on I'll be one of the spectators.
Okay.
I'll be one of the flies on the wall.
Great.
And I usually make some comments and ask questions, during the book club. I enjoy it to the maximum degree. It's one of my favorite things that happen. And so I'm looking forward to having you on it. And so why don't we just go ahead and wrap it up for today?
Uh-huh.
I don't want to take up too much of your time. I've taken 2.5 hours of it at
This has been great.
so
I
far.
hate that I was late, but I hope I made up for it.
Oh no, you definitely did. Yeah, it's
Thank
no
you.
problem. Life happens, and happens to me too. So uh, I've never been late to a podcast, but that's only yet.
Right. I can tell you one thing that really helps for me, because I do have a calendar and stuff, but I also have two kids. One thing that really helps for me is like constant talking. So like you sent me a link like a few hours before, but like if we do another one, I think if you send me a couple of messages a couple days ahead of time, it kind of consistently reminds me. So
Okay.
for the future, that might help me overwhelm all the different last minute forces that throw me off sometimes.
I can try to do that. Yeah.
Okay.
And I also put reminders on the Mere Molinism platform, the Mere Molinism forum on Facebook. Uh,
Okay.
I don't know if you're on that or not.
I'll look for it. I haven't been there.
Okay. Well, Molinism kind of has tentacles that touch a whole lot of different theological branches,
Right.
and philosophical ones as well. Our conversation today is actually relevant for Molinism, because Molinism states that God has middle knowledge, that we have libertarian free will, and the idea of libertarian free will is extremely relevant in any discussion of atheism or theism and so on.
Uh,
Um, so I would encourage you to join that group.
okay.
Um, I make contributions from it, to it from time to time. Um, but I used to be one of the founders of the Mere Molinism forum, but
Hmm.
I actually switched to a different Facebook persona
Okay.
an account. And so that original one is not one of the founders of the Mere, but I'm back on it as a top contributor. I don't know what that means. Maybe that just means that I whine more than other people.
Okay. Are you going to put this on that page too? Where are you going to put this
I,
video?
I put the live broadcast on the Mere Molinism page, and it's still there.
Okay.
But somebody can watch this discussion on YouTube after
Okay.
the fact, because they're always recorded, and then they're always on my YouTube channel, uh,
Okay.
which is still wildly under construction right now, by the way.
Mine too. Mine's pathetic.
Kind of disorganized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All of my videos are pathetic, but they're there.
They're pathetic. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, hopefully this one will be one of the less pathetic ones.
Yeah.
My boss says whenever he rallies the team and gives us our marching orders for the week, he says, "Okay, go out there and make it suck less."
Yeah. I think that's the best you can do.
Yeah, that's what we can
As an
do, right?
atheist, that's the best you can do.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Richard.
Thank you.
And I want to put a call out to whoever's listening. Subscribe to my channel, even though it's kind of a mess right now. I promise I'll clean it up a little bit if you subscribe to it, and I'll do a little bit of work on it. And so let's definitely regroup. And if
Yes.
you can read the book, if you're interested,
Yeah.
um,
That'll
I
be our
would love-
next step, is me reading the book, and we can pick a topic and dig into some of those thoughts.
yeah, definitely, absolutely, that'd be great. Well, it's been an honor, Richard.
Thank you.
I
For me as
appreciate
well.
it. Appreciate it
Thank you.
very much, and I look forward to more conversations in the future.
Thank you.
All right.
I'll see you on the 8th.
Yep, absolutely. Looking forward to that too.
Okay.
Okay,
All right. Bye. Bye.
off we go.